My daughter-in-law smiled as she lifted her wine glass and said, "Old people should stay quiet." The room exploded with nervous laughter. 20 people sat around the table. No one defended me, not even my son. I felt every eye turned toward me. Instead of arguing, I reached into my purse and placed a thick envelope on the table. Then I looked directly at my daughter-in-law and called her by a name nobody in that room had ever heard before. The color drained from her face. And in that moment, I knew her perfect life was about to fall apart. If you've ever felt dismissed, underestimated, or ignored because of your age, I'd love to hear your story. Before we continue, please take a moment to like and subscribe if family stories like this speak to you. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if someone told you to stay quiet in your own family? Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I always enjoy reading your messages. 3 months before that dinner, I still believed I could save my family simply by being patient. My name is Chapman. I was 68 years old, a widow, and the mother of 1 son. After my husband Richard passed away 6 years earlier, my world had become much smaller than it used to be. The house felt quieter. The mornings felt longer. And holidays never felt the same. The one bright spot in my life was my granddaughter, Ava. She was 10 years old, full of energy, and blessed with the same warm smile her grandfather used to have. Every Sunday, I looked forward to seeing her. That was why I never complained. Not when my daughter-in-law ignored me, not when she rolled her eyes at things I said, and not when she treated me like an unwanted guest instead of family. One Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Ethan. "Hey, Mom." The sound of my son's voice immediately made me smile. "Hi, sweetheart." "We're having dinner Sunday. Brittany's making roast chicken. You should come." "I'd love to." "Good. Ava's been asking about you." That alone was enough to brighten my entire day. After we hung up, I spent the next few days looking forward to the visit. I baked Ava's favorite apple cinnamon bread on Saturday evening. She loved it warm with butter. The recipe had belonged to Richard's mother. It had been passed down through 3 generations. Small things like that mattered to me. Family traditions mattered. At least they still did to me. Sunday arrived. I dressed carefully. Nothing fancy. A blue cardigan, comfortable shoes, a silver necklace Richard had given me on our 30th anniversary. Before leaving, I glanced at his photograph on the mantel. "I wish you were here," I whispered. Then I drove across town. Ethan and Brittany lived in a large suburban neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio. The house was beautiful, far nicer than anything Richard and I had ever owned. Every time I looked at it, I felt proud of my son. I parked in the driveway and carried the loaf of bread to the front door. Brittany answered. Her smile appeared for exactly 2 seconds. Then it vanished. "Oh, just one word. Oh, not hello, not nice to see you. Just oh." I forced a smile. "I brought some apple bread for Ava." Brittany looked at the wrapped loaf as if I had brought a bag of garbage. "We already have dessert." "I know. This is just something she likes." "Fine." She stepped aside. I entered. The smell of food filled the house. Ava spotted me immediately. "Grandma!" She ran across the room and threw her arms around me. I hugged her tightly. For a moment, everything felt normal. For a moment, I felt loved. Then Brittany appeared beside us. "Ava, honey, why don't you go finish setting the table?" The little girl sighed. "Okay." She walked away. I noticed the disappointment in her eyes. That bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Ethan emerged from the kitchen carrying drinks. "Mom." He hugged me. His hug was warm, genuine, the kind of hug that reminded me my son still loved me, even if he often seemed blind to what was happening around him. Dinner preparations continued. I offered to help. Brittany declined. Twice. Then a third time. "No, Sherry, I've got it." Her tone made it clear she didn't want me touching anything. So I sat in the family room and watched television with Ava. But something felt different that evening. Brittany seemed distracted, nervous. Every few minutes, she checked her phone. Then she would quickly lock the screen. At one point, the phone buzzed again. She looked at the message. Her face tightened. Without saying anything, she hurried into the kitchen. A minute later, I heard the back door open. Curious, I glanced toward the window. Brittany had stepped outside. She was pacing on the patio, talking on the phone. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the patio door wasn't fully closed, and her voice carried. "I said I'll handle it." Silence. Then she spoke again. "No, he doesn't know anything." Another pause. Her tone became sharper. "He can never find out." A chill ran through me. Who couldn't find out Ethan about what I leaned slightly closer? Not enough to be obvious. Just enough to hear. "I need more time." Pause. I said, "I'll take care of it." Then she ended the call. A few seconds later, she walked back inside. The moment she saw me sitting nearby, her expression changed. The nervousness disappeared. The smile returned, but it looked forced, almost rehearsed. "Everything okay?" I asked casually. "Of course," she answered too quickly. "Just a friend." I nodded, but something about the explanation didn't feel right. The rest of the evening passed normally on the surface. We ate dinner. Ava talked about school. Ethan discussed work. Brittany smiled and laughed at all the appropriate moments. Yet, I kept remembering those words. He can never find out. Who and what exactly was being hidden after dinner? Ava pulled me into her room to show me a science project she had been working on. A model solar system hung from the ceiling. She proudly pointed at each planet. I listened carefully, asked questions, praised her hard work. Children deserve to feel heard. When we returned downstairs, Brittany was cleaning dishes. Ethan was taking out the trash. For a brief moment, Brittany thought she was alone. I watched her open a kitchen drawer. She removed an envelope, looked inside, then immediately shoved it back when she noticed me standing there. The movement was quick, but not quick enough. I saw several sheets of paper, official-looking documents, and Brittany's hands were shaking. That was when I stopped dismissing my instincts. For months, I had told myself I was imagining things. For months, I had blamed my concerns on loneliness. But a mother develops instincts over decades, and mine were suddenly screaming. Something was wrong. Very wrong. When I left that night, Ethan walked me to my car. The autumn air felt cold. He hugged me goodbye. Love you, Mom. I love you too. I looked toward the house. Through the front window, I could see Brittany standing inside, watching us, watching me. Her expression wasn't friendly. It wasn't welcoming. It wasn't even neutral. It looked like fear. And that frightened me more than anything, because innocent people don't usually look afraid. As I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about the phone call, the envelope, the nervous glances, the secretive behavior. For the first time, a terrible thought entered my mind. What if the biggest threat to my son's future wasn't outside the family? What if it was sitting at his dinner table every night? I didn't know it then? But that single Sunday dinner was the beginning of everything. The beginning of a truth that would eventually destroy a marriage, shatter years of lies, and force me to make the hardest decision of my life. And before it was over, I would discover exactly what Brittany was so desperate to keep hidden from Ethan. The hardest sacrifices are often the ones nobody remembers. A week after that strange Sunday dinner, I found myself sitting alone in my living room, staring at a photograph that had been taken nearly 15 years earlier. Richard was standing beside me. Ethan was in the middle, young, hopeful, excited about the future. The picture had been taken the day he graduated from college. Back then, life seemed simple. Back then, I believed that if you loved your children enough, everything would eventually work out. I know now that love isn't always enough. Sometimes people have to choose whether they're willing to see the truth, and sometimes they don't. I placed the photograph back on the shelf and made myself a cup of tea. As the kettle boiled, my mind drifted back to a time Ethan would never fully understand. The year he bought his house, 7 years earlier, Ethan had called me late one evening. I could still remember the disappointment in his voice. Mom, I don't think it's going to happen. What won't? The house. I immediately knew what he meant. For months, he and Brittany had been searching for their first home. They had finally found one they loved. The same house they still lived in today. Unfortunately, housing prices had climbed quickly. The down payment was larger than expected, and despite working hard, they didn't have enough saved. How much are you short? I asked. There was a long pause. Too much. A few days later, Richard and I sat at our kitchen table discussing the situation. My husband had already been battling the illness that would eventually take his life. Yet, even then, his first concern was our son. We should help him, Richard said. I nodded. I know. The problem was that we weren't wealthy, not even close. Most of our savings were tied up in our home. The small house where we had raised Ethan, the house filled with 30 years of memories. The house Richard loved. For nearly an hour, we sat quietly. Then Richard reached across the table and squeezed my hand. He's our son. That was all he said. He didn't need to say more. 3 months later, we sold the house. Most people assumed we moved because of Richard's health. Only a handful knew the truth. A significant portion of the money went directly toward helping Ethan purchase his home. When I handed him the check, he looked stunned. "Mom, are you sure?" I smiled. "Your father and I talked about it." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. "I'll pay you back." I laughed softly. "No. Sweetheart, that's not why parents do things." I meant every word. I never expected repayment. I never expected praise. I simply wanted him to have opportunities Richard and I never had. At the time. Brittany thanked me, or at least she appeared grateful. Looking back now, I wonder if she ever truly was. Because as the years passed, something changed. At first, it happened gradually, almost invisibly. Small comments, tiny insults disguised as jokes, little reminders that I didn't quite belong. If I offered advice, Brittany would smile and say things like, "Things are different now, Sherry," or "That's how people used to do it," or my personal favorite, "You're from a different generation." Every statement sounded harmless on its own, but together they carried a message. You're old. You're outdated. Your opinion doesn't matter. The worst part wasn't what Brittany said. The worst part was that Ethan rarely noticed. Or, if he did notice, he dismissed it. He always assumed everyone had good intentions. That had been true when he was a child. It wasn't always true as an adult. One Saturday afternoon, met about 2 weeks after overhearing Brittany's mysterious phone call, I visited Ava during her soccer game. The weather was cool and sunny. Parents lined the field cheering. Children ran across the grass. For an hour, everything felt normal. After the game, Ava ran toward me, carrying a juice box. "Grandma, did you see my goal?" "I sure did. It was awesome." "It absolutely was." She grinned proudly. Then Brittany approached. Ava immediately grew quieter. The change was subtle, but I noticed it. Children often reveal more through body language than words. "We need to get going," Brittany said. "Okay." Ava hugged me goodbye. As she pulled away, she whispered something. "So I can come over next weekend?" I smiled. "Of course." Before I could say anything else, Brittany answered, "We'll see." Ava's smile faded. Again, another small moment. Another small disappointment. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Something felt increasingly wrong inside that family. Not dramatic, not obvious, just wrong. The following Tuesday, I decided to organize some old financial records. Years of paperwork sat inside filing cabinets in my spare bedroom. Bills, tax returns, insurance documents, mortgage records, the kinds of things nobody enjoys sorting through. Hours passed. Dust covered my hands. Stacks of folders surrounded me. Then I found something unexpected, a folder labeled Home Purchase Assistance. I opened it. Inside were copies of documents from Ethan's home purchase 7 years earlier. Most of it was exactly what I remembered. Transfer records. Bank statements. Legal paperwork. Then I noticed something unusual. A supplemental agreement attached to the original financial assistance. I read it twice. Then a third time. A strange feeling settled into my stomach. Because according to the paperwork, the funds Richard and I had provided weren't structured exactly as a gift. Part of the arrangement had been recorded as a protected family contribution. Not ownership, but not entirely disconnected either. Certain disclosures required our contribution to remain documented. I remembered the attorney explaining it years earlier. At the time, I hadn't paid much attention. I trusted everyone involved. Now I found myself rereading every line carefully. The document itself wasn't explosive, but it established something important. The money Richard and I provided had never completely disappeared from the legal record. Our role remained documented, recorded, traceable. And suddenly, I understood why that mattered. If financial irregularities existed, those records could become relevant. Very relevant. I sat back in my chair, thinking, connecting pieces. Brittany's secret phone calls, the hidden envelope, the nervous behavior, the strange financial documents. For the first time, I seriously considered the possibility that money sat at the center of everything. Not marriage problems, not family tension. Money, that realization frightened me. Because financial deception has a way of spreading. One lie requires another, then another, until the entire foundation begins to crack. As evening approached, I placed the folder on my desk. I intended to call Ethan, to ask a few questions. Nothing confrontational, just questions. But before I could pick up the phone, doubt stopped me. What would I say? Your wife seems nervous. Your paperwork looks unusual. I had no proof. Only instincts. And instincts weren't enough. Not yet. So I decided to wait. To observe. To gather facts. What I didn't realize was that fate was already moving faster than I was. Because only a few days later, a complete stranger would approach me in a parking lot. And that woman would reveal the first real crack in Brittany's carefully constructed life. A crack that would eventually bring everything crashing down. 3 days later, I met the woman who changed everything. At the time, I didn't realize how important that encounter would become. I thought it was just another strange moment in a growing collection of strange moments. Instead, it became the first real piece of evidence that my instincts had been trying to warn me. It happened on a Friday afternoon. I had volunteered to pick Ava up from school because Ethan was working late. Brittany had texted me that morning. A short message. Can you get Ava today? No greeting? No thank you? Just the request. Still, I immediately agreed. Any chance to spend time with my granddaughter was worth it. The school sat on the edge of a quiet suburban neighborhood. Parents filled the parking lot. Children poured out of the building carrying backpacks and lunchboxes. The familiar sounds of laughter and conversation drifted through the air. I spotted Ava waving excitedly. "Grandma," I smiled. "There she is." She climbed into my car and immediately started talking about a science test. For the next 15 minutes, she spoke nonstop. I loved every second of it. Children have a way of reminding you that joy still exists. When we arrived at Ethan's house, Brittany wasn't home yet. Ava went inside with a neighbor who was babysitting for an hour. I decided to stop by a grocery store before heading home. That simple decision changed everything. The store was only a few miles away. I picked up a few items, Milk, bread, coffee, nothing exciting. As I walked back toward my car, I noticed a woman standing near the end of the parking lot. At first, she didn't seem unusual. Mid-50s, brown hair, simple clothes. She looked tired, very tired, the kind of tired that comes from carrying problems for too many years. As I approached my vehicle, I noticed she was staring at me, not casually, intently, almost nervously. I unlocked my car. The woman took a step forward, then another. "Excuse me," I paused. "Yes," she hesitated. For a moment, it seemed as though she might change her mind. Then she spoke. "Do you know Brittany Chapman?" The question instantly caught my attention. I tried not to show it. "Why do you ask?" The woman glanced around the parking lot, as if making sure nobody was listening. "I saw you picking up a little girl from Lincoln Elementary." My heart beat slightly faster. "That's my granddaughter." The woman nodded. "I thought so." Something about her expression unsettled me. Fear, regret, and something else. Recognition. The kind of recognition people have when they discover a ghost from their past. "Who are you?" I asked. "My name is Linda Parker." She swallowed hard. "Does Brittany still live in that house on Meadow Creek Drive?" I stared at her. "Yes." Linda looked down briefly. Then she whispered something unexpected. "God help that family." A cold feeling moved through my chest. "What do you mean?" She immediately shook her head. "Nothing." "That doesn't sound like nothing." Linda looked conflicted. Part of her wanted to leave. Another part desperately wanted to speak. "Finally," she sighed. "Maybe I shouldn't have approached you." "Approached me about what?" Again she looked around. The parking lot suddenly felt very quiet. Too quiet. Then she asked a question that made my stomach tighten. "Does she still use the name Brittany Chapman everywhere?" I frowned. "Of course." Linda stared at me. "No." She shook her head. "I mean, before that." My pulse quickened. "Before that." "What are you talking about?" Linda's eyes widened slightly. The reaction told me she had expected me to know. Apparently, I didn't. "You don't know." It wasn't a question. It was a realization. I felt my mouth go dry. "Know what?" Linda seemed to regret every word she'd already said. But it was too late. The conversation had moved beyond casual curiosity. "Brittany didn't always use that last name. Lots of people change names after marriage." "I'm not talking about Chapman." My heart skipped. Linda lowered her voice. "I'm talking about before she met your son." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she quietly said a surname I had never heard before. "Collins. Brittany Collins." The name meant nothing to me. But the fear in Linda's voice meant everything. "How do you know her?" I asked. Linda looked away. The answer clearly hurt. "Because she cost me nearly $40,000. The words landed like a punch. "What?" Linda closed her eyes. For a moment, I thought she might cry. Instead, she took a deep breath. "It was years ago." "What happened?" She shook her head. "I don't have proof anymore." "Proof of what again?" Hesitation. Again, fear. Then she said something that would stay with me for months. Some people are very good at becoming someone new when their old life catches up with them. I felt a chill. What does that mean? Linda looked directly into my eyes. It means if I were you, I'd start asking questions. Before I could respond, she stepped backward, clearly preparing to leave. Wait, she stopped. Please tell me what you're talking about. Linda's expression softened. For the first time, she seemed less afraid and more sad. I wish someone had warned me. Then she walked away, just like that. No explanation, no details, no phone number, nothing. I stood frozen beside my car, trying to process what had just happened. $40,000, a different last name, a warning, questions. My mind raced the entire drive home. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I knew I couldn't ignore this anymore. Maybe Linda was mistaken. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe Brittany had simply been involved in some failed business venture years ago. But I needed facts. Not guesses. Facts. That evening, after dinner, I sat down at my computer. I typed the name into a search engine. Brittany Collins. Thousands of results appeared. Most were unrelated. For nearly an hour, I found nothing useful. Then I discovered an old business registration database. A name caught my attention. Brittany Collins. The age matched. The state matched. My hands trembled slightly as I clicked. The record was nearly 9 years old. A small consulting company, now dissolved. Interesting, but not alarming, not yet. I continued searching. One document led to another. Another led to a public business archive. Then I found something else, a legal notice. Very old, buried deep in public records. The details were incomplete. But one thing stood out immediately. The same Brittany Collins had once been listed in a civil dispute involving financial losses. The amount wasn't visible. The outcome wasn't visible. Only fragments remained. Yet it was enough to make my stomach tighten. Because ordinary people don't usually leave behind trails like that. I printed the documents, placed them in a folder, and sat quietly for a long time. Richard used to tell me something. When something feels wrong, don't ignore it just because you wish it weren't true. That advice suddenly echoed in my head. I wasn't looking for reasons to dislike Brittany. I wanted to be wrong. More than anything, I wanted this entire situation to be a misunderstanding. For Ethan's sake, for Ava's sake, for my family's sake. But the pieces were beginning to move, and for the first time, I could see a pattern forming. A hidden past, a changed name, financial problems, secret phone calls, fear. The woman in the parking lot had only given me a few clues. Yet those clues were enough to open a door, and once that door opened, there would be no way to close it again. Because I had just begun digging into Brittany's past. And what I would eventually discover was far worse than I could imagine. After meeting Linda Parker, I stopped looking at Brittany as a difficult daughter-in-law. I started looking at her as a question that needed an answer. The difference may sound small. It wasn't. For years, I had tolerated Brittany's behavior because I believed family harmony was more important than my personal feelings. If she ignored me, I stayed quiet. If she insulted me, I stayed polite. If she made me feel unwelcome, I reminded myself that Ethan loved her. But now I had something I couldn't ignore. A woman with no reason to lie had recognized Brittany immediately. Not as Brittany Chapman, as Brittany Collins. And, according to Linda, that name carried a troubling history. The more I thought about it, the more determined I became. I wasn't trying to destroy a marriage. I wasn't trying to prove myself right. I simply wanted to know whether my son was safe. That was all. At least that's what I kept telling myself. The following week, I accepted another invitation to dinner. This time, I arrived with a different mindset. I wasn't there as a guest. I was there as an observer. When I walked into the house, Brittany greeted me with the same practiced smile she always used. "Hi, Sherry." "Hello, Brittany." For a split second, I wondered if she somehow knew I had started asking questions. But if she did, she hid it well. Dinner proceeded normally, or at least it appeared normal. Ethan talked about work. Ava talked about school. Brittany talked about neighborhood events and upcoming holiday plans. Yet something had changed. Once you suspect someone is hiding something, you begin noticing details you previously ignored. For example, Brittany checked her phone constantly. Not every hour, every few minutes. She would glance down, read something, lock the screen immediately, then force herself back into the conversation. Another thing I noticed was her reaction whenever money came up. At one point, Ethan mentioned receiving a performance bonus. Most spouses would be excited. Instead, Brittany looked relieved. Relieved. The emotion lasted only a second, but I saw it. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. A few days later, I decided to test a theory, not directly, carefully. During a phone call with Ethan, I casually mentioned the old house purchase records I had recently organized. "I found all the paperwork from when you bought your home." "Oh, yeah," Ethan laughed. "I haven't seen those documents in years." "Neither had I. Probably belongs in a museum," I smiled. Then I asked a seemingly innocent question. "Do you still handle most of the finances yourself?" The silence lasted a fraction too long. "No. Brittany handles most of that now." That answer bothered me. Not because spouses shouldn't share finances. Because Ethan's sounded uncertain. As if he hadn't thought about it recently. "That's convenient," I said. "Yeah." Another pause. "She enjoys dealing with paperwork more than I do." I changed the subject, but my concern deepened. That same evening, I began paying closer attention whenever I visited. And slowly, little inconsistencies started appearing. One Saturday afternoon, Ava invited me to attend a school art exhibit. Of course I went. Ethan was working. Brittany arrived separately. During the event, I noticed her step outside twice to take phone calls. Both times she looked agitated. Both times she returned looking frustrated. When the exhibit ended, Ava ran to show her mother a painting. Brittany barely looked at it. Her attention remained glued to her phone. The disappointment on Ava's face broke my heart. Children always notice where their parents' priorities are, even when adults pretend otherwise. A week later, another strange thing happened. I was helping Ava clean out old school papers at the kitchen table. Brittany had gone upstairs. Her laptop remained open on the counter. I wasn't snooping, at least not intentionally. But a notification suddenly appeared on the screen, just for a moment, long enough for me to see part of it. Past due notice. The words vanished almost immediately. Still, I had seen them. My stomach tightened. Past due notice. For what? Credit cards, loans. Something else I forced myself not to investigate further. The temptation was there. But crossing that line would make me no better than the person I suspected. Instead, I waited and watched. The following Thursday, I received another unexpected clue. It came from Ava. Children often reveal truths without realizing it. That afternoon, I took her out for ice cream after school. We sat in a booth near the window. She happily worked on a giant chocolate sundae. Halfway through dessert, she casually mentioned something. "Mom gets a lot of mail now." I looked up. "What kind of mail?" "I don't know." She shrugged. "She gets mad when it comes." My attention sharpened. "Mad?" Ava nodded. "Sometimes she takes it straight to her room." "What kind of envelopes? Big ones?" She returned to eating ice cream. For her, the topic was already over. For me, it was just beginning. Big envelopes, past due notices, secret phone calls. The puzzle pieces were multiplying. Yet they still didn't fit together. A few days later, I got another glimpse behind the curtain, this time entirely by accident. I arrived at Ethan's house early one Sunday. Much earlier than expected. The front door was unlocked. I stepped inside. Immediately, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Brittany was on the phone again. She hadn't realized I was there. "That's not possible." Pause. "No, I made the payment." Another pause. Then, "I told you I'm waiting for funds." My heart skipped. Waiting for funds. The voice on the other end was too faint to hear. But Brittany's panic was unmistakable. "I need another 2 weeks." Silence. Then, "Please." I had never heard Brittany say please to anyone, not once. The desperation in her voice shocked me. A second later, she turned around and saw me. The color drained from her face. For an instant, neither of us moved. Then her expression hardened. "How long have you been standing there?" "Only a few seconds." It wasn't entirely true. But it wasn't entirely false either. She stared at me, trying to determine whether I had heard more. Finally, she forced a smile. "Just a billing issue." "Sounds stressful." "It isn't." The answer came too quickly. Again, everything with Brittany seemed too quick, too rehearsed, too controlled. That evening, after I returned home, I opened the folder containing everything I'd gathered so far. Linda's name, the business records, the old legal filing, my handwritten notes, the strange behavior, the phone calls, the financial warnings. One by one, I reviewed every detail. Then I wrote something at the top of a blank page. What is she hiding for the first time? I began wondering if the answer wasn't merely debt. Debt alone didn't explain everything. Debt didn't explain the fear. Debt didn't explain the changed name. Debt didn't explain why a complete stranger had reacted with such alarm. Something larger sat underneath all of it. Something buried. Something dangerous. And although I didn't know it yet, I was getting closer. Because, within days, I would discover information that transformed my suspicions into something much more serious. A secret past, a hidden financial trail, and evidence that Brittany's problems weren't just threatening her own future. They were threatening Ethan's as well. The next major breakthrough came from a dusty cardboard box in my attic. If Richard had been alive, he probably would have laughed at the irony. For years, he had begged me to organize the attic. For years, I had promised I would. Now, after his death, I finally found myself climbing those old wooden stairs. Not because I wanted to clean, because I was looking for answers. The previous weeks had changed me. I was no longer simply worried. I was suspicious, and every new clue seemed to point toward financial deception. The question was whether I could prove it. Saturday morning arrived cold and gray. I brewed coffee, put on old clothes, and carried a flashlight upstairs. Dust covered everything. Boxes lined the walls. Old Christmas decorations sat untouched. Photo albums filled with memories occupied entire shelves. For a few moments, I became distracted. I found pictures of Ethan as a little boy. Pictures of Richard teaching him how to ride a bicycle. Pictures from camping trips and birthday parties. Back when life felt uncomplicated. Back before secrets entered our family. I smiled sadly and set the photographs aside. Then I continued searching. Hours passed. Most of the boxes contained nothing useful, just forgotten pieces of our past. Then I found a storage container labeled House Documents. My pulse quickened. I carried it downstairs, placed it on the dining room table, and began sorting through the contents. Mortgage records, insurance policies, tax paperwork, closing documents, everything connected to the sale of our old home and Ethan's purchase of his current one. I reviewed each page carefully. Not because I expected to find a smoking gun, because I wanted to understand every financial connection that still existed. About 40 minutes later, I discovered something interesting. A copy of a legal memorandum prepared by the attorney who handled the family contribution. The document explained how Richard and I had structured part of the financial assistance. The language was technical, but one section stood out. Any future refinancing or significant restructuring involving the property required disclosure of prior financial contributions. I read the paragraph twice, then 3 times. My stomach tightened. Because if someone had recently attempted to leverage the property financially, that paperwork could become extremely relevant. I made copies, placed them in a new folder, and continued working. An hour later, my phone rang. The caller ID surprised me. Michael Reynolds. I hadn't spoken to Richard's longtime attorney in several months. Michael was 65 years old, sharp-minded, meticulous, and one of the few people I trusted completely. Sherry. Michael, how are you holding up? We exchanged a few pleasantries. Then his tone changed. Immediately, the shift caught my attention. Actually, there's something I've been meaning to discuss with you. I sat up straighter. What is it? A brief pause. I came across a file recently. My pulse quickened. What kind of file? One involving Ethan? My stomach dropped. The room suddenly felt colder. What happened? I'm not entirely sure yet. Those words frightened me more than certainty would have. Because Michael was not a man who speculated. If he sounded concerned, there was a reason. I need you to stay calm, he said. I hated hearing that sentence. People only say it when something is wrong. Just tell me. Another pause. Then Michael continued. A financial institution contacted my office regarding documentation connected to Ethan's property. My grip tightened around the phone. What documentation? They were verifying records connected to prior ownership disclosures. My mind immediately returned to the papers sitting on my dining room table. The same documents I had been reviewing all morning. Why would they need that? That's exactly what I asked. Silence. Then Michael spoke carefully. Apparently, someone recently submitted financing paperwork involving the property. I felt my heart begin to pound. What kind of financing? That's still unclear. I stood from my chair and began pacing. Did Ethan apply for a loan? I don't know. The uncertainty felt unbearable. What do you mean you don't know? Because something doesn't add up. I stopped walking. What doesn't add up? Michael lowered his voice. The signature. My entire body went still. The signature. Yes. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he continued. The documents contain Ethan's signature. I swallowed hard. But, Michael sighed. But it doesn't look right. The room seemed to shrink around me. What are you saying? I'm saying I've seen Ethan's signature many times over the years. Another pause. And this one raises concerns. I sank slowly into a chair. Concerns. That word echoed through my mind. Not proof, not certainty, but concerns. The legal way of saying something may be very wrong. You think it's forged? I didn't say that. His answer told me everything. Attorneys rarely say exactly what they mean until they have evidence. But I knew Michael well enough to read between the lines. You think it's possible? Yes. I closed my eyes. Immediately, Brittany's face appeared in my mind. The secret phone calls, the hidden envelopes, the overdue notices, the panic, the lies. No, not lies. Not yet. Suspicions. I forced myself to remain objective. What happens now? Michael answered carefully. I need more information. From Ethan. Eventually, the word eventually stood out. Eventually, not immediately, which meant Michael believed more investigation was necessary before raising alarms. That frightened me even more, because it suggested the situation could be larger than a simple paperwork mistake. After the call ended, I sat silently for several minutes, trying to process everything. A possible loan, property documents, a questionable signature. The pieces were beginning to connect, and I didn't like the picture they were forming. That evening, I called Ethan, Not to accuse, not to interrogate, just to ask questions. Hey, Mom. Hi, sweetheart. Everything okay? I hesitated, then chose my words carefully. Have you refinanced the house recently? Silence. Refinanced. Yes. No. His answer came immediately. Without hesitation, without uncertainty. No. A chill moved through me. You're sure? Positive. Another pause. Then he laughed softly. Why? I forced myself to sound casual. Oh, I was organizing some old paperwork. Haven't touched any mortgage stuff in years. I thanked him and changed the subject. But inside, my fear intensified. Because if Ethan hadn't initiated financing activity, then who had? And why, that night I barely slept? Questions kept circling through my mind. At 3 a.m, I got out of bed and walked into the kitchen. The house felt painfully empty without Richard. I often missed him, but never more than during moments like this. He had always known how to separate fear from facts, how to remain calm, how to see clearly. I stared out the window into the darkness. Then I made a decision. No more assumptions, no more guessing. I would gather evidence. Real evidence. If Brittany was innocent, I wanted proof. If she wasn't, I wanted proof of that too. Either way, I needed the truth, not for myself, for Ethan, and especially for Ava. Because whatever was happening had already moved beyond family tension, beyond hurt feelings, beyond awkward dinners. Financial documents were involved now. Potential fraud. Potential deception. Potential danger. And deep down, I could feel something approaching. Something larger. Something that would soon force every secret into the open. What I didn't know was that the next clue wouldn't come from paperwork. It would come from the smallest member of the family, a 10-year-old girl who had been quietly watching everything. And what Ava would tell me would change the entire investigation. Children notice far more than adults realize. Most of the time, they simply don't understand what they're seeing. That was exactly what made them dangerous to liars. They tell the truth without realizing it's important. A week after my conversation with Michael Reynolds, Ava spent the weekend at my house. It wasn't unusual. She had been asking for a sleepover for months. Normally, Brittany always found a reason to say no. School projects, busy schedules, activities, excuses. This time, surprisingly, she agreed. Perhaps she was distracted by her own problems. Perhaps she thought I had stopped paying attention. Either way, Ava arrived Friday evening carrying a small overnight bag and a huge smile. For the first few hours, everything felt wonderfully normal. We baked cookies, watched an old family movie, played board games. For a little while, I forgot about Brittany, forgot about investigations, forgot about suspicious phone calls and forged signatures. I was simply a grandmother spending time with her granddaughter. Late that evening, after the movie ended, Ava curled up beside me on the couch. The house was quiet. Rain tapped softly against the windows. She rested her head against my shoulder. Grandma, yes, sweetheart, can I ask you something? Of course. She hesitated. Do grown-ups always tell the truth? The question surprised me. I looked down at her. Why would you ask that? Ava stared at the television screen even though it had been turned off. I don't know. The answer sounded rehearsed, like she wasn't telling me the whole story. I waited patiently. Eventually, she spoke again. Mom says some lies are necessary. My stomach tightened. What kind of lies? She shrugged. I don't know. Then she became quiet. Too quiet. The conversation drifted elsewhere after that. But her question stayed with me. The following morning, we made pancakes. After breakfast, we spent several hours working on a school project. Everything seemed fine. Then, sometime after lunch, another unexpected moment occurred. We were organizing supplies at the dining room table when Ava suddenly said, Mom doesn't like when I talk about you. I froze, only for a second, but long enough for her to notice. What do you mean? Ava continued drawing. She says you cause problems. The words hurt more than I expected, not because they were new, because hearing them through a child's voice made them real. I forced myself to remain calm. What exactly does she say? Ava looked uncertain, as though she wasn't sure whether she should answer. Then she quietly said, She says Grandma asks too many questions. The irony almost made me laugh. If only Ava knew how true that had become. Still, I kept my voice gentle. Does that upset you? She nodded. I like talking to you. My heart broke. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I like talking to you too. For several minutes, neither of us said anything. Then Ava unknowingly revealed something far more important. Mom gets mad when people come over. My attention sharpened immediately. What people? She shrugged. The men. Every nerve in my body went alert. What men? Again. She shrugged. The way children do when they assume adults already know what they're talking about. The men who visit, I tried very hard not to show my reaction. How often do they visit? I don't know. She thought for a moment. Sometimes when Dad works late. My pulse quickened. What do they want? I don't know. That answer made sense. A 10-year-old wouldn't understand adult conversations. Still, I needed more information. What do they look like? Ava considered the question carefully. One is old. She held up a finger. One has a beard, another finger. And one wears suits. Not exactly useful, but enough to confirm these weren't random observations. These were real visitors. Visitors Ethan apparently didn't know about? Have you ever talked to them? She shook her head. Mom tells me to stay upstairs. That statement bothered me. A lot. What happens when they visit? Sometimes they argue. The room suddenly felt colder. Argue. She nodded. I heard shouting once. I took a slow breath. About what? I don't know. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. The man with the beard said he was tired of waiting. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Tired of waiting. The exact kind of phrase someone says when money is involved. Debt, repayment, obligations, not casual friendships, not neighborhood visits, money. Immediately, my mind returned to Brittany's phone calls. The overdue notices, the desperation, everything pointed in the same direction. Ava, meanwhile, returned to coloring as though none of this mattered. Because to her, it didn't. She was simply describing ordinary events. But to me, every sentence felt like another piece of a dangerous puzzle. That evening, after Ava fell asleep, I sat alone in the kitchen, thinking, reviewing everything. Visitors, arguments, secret meetings, financial pressure. And then another thought occurred to me. What if these weren't business associates? What if they were creditors? The possibility felt increasingly likely. The next morning, I drove Ava home. The moment we arrived, Brittany opened the door. Her smile looked forced. Again. Almost every expression on her face seemed forced lately. Did she behave? Perfectly. Ava hugged me goodbye and ran inside. As she disappeared down the hallway, Brittany stepped closer, lowering her voice. Did she say anything strange? The question caught me completely off guard. For a second, I almost revealed my surprise. Almost. Instead, I smiled politely. Children always say strange things. Something flashed across Brittany's face. Not relief. Not exactly. More like nervous calculation. She was trying to determine whether Ava had revealed something. And that alone told me everything. Innocent people don't worry about what children might accidentally say. The realization stayed with me all day. That evening, I called Michael. I think there are creditors. He listened carefully as I explained everything Ava had told me. When I finished, he remained silent for several moments. Then he asked, "Did Ava mention names?" "No, addresses, no," he sighed. "I was hoping for something concrete." So was I. Then Michael surprised me. "I may have something." My pulse immediately quickened. "What?" "A private investigator I know checked into some public filings connected to Brittany Collins." I sat up straighter. "And there are indications of unresolved financial disputes." My heart pounded. How many? I don't know yet. The uncertainty frustrated me. But the next sentence changed everything. "However, one name keeps appearing." "What name?" Michael hesitated. Then he answered, "A debt recovery company." The room seemed to spin. Debt recovery, collectors, people who pursue unpaid obligations. Suddenly, Ava's mysterious visitors made perfect sense. Or at least they seemed to. But Michael wasn't finished. "There's something else." My stomach tightened. "What?" "The company has records showing recent contact attempts." I gripped the phone harder. "With Brittany. Possibly." "Possibly." Michael's voice grew serious. "The address attached to the contact records is Ethan's house." I closed my eyes. For several seconds, I couldn't speak, because at that moment, the situation stopped being about Brittany alone. The danger had reached Ethan, their home, their finances, their future. And for the first time, I began to fear that my son might already be trapped inside something much bigger than he realized. Something Brittany had worked desperately to keep hidden. Something that was rapidly approaching the surface. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It arrived in fragments. A document here, a name there, a conversation that seemed meaningless until it connected to something else. By the time Michael Reynolds called me the following Tuesday, I already knew Brittany was hiding something. What I didn't know was how far the deception went, or how many lives had been damaged before she entered my son's. I was drinking coffee when the phone rang. The moment I saw Michael's name on the screen, I knew this wasn't a casual call. His voice confirmed it. "Sherry, are you sitting down?" My stomach tightened. Yes. I found more information. I closed my eyes briefly. "Tell me." For several seconds, I heard papers shuffling. Then Michael began. The company Brittany was associated with wasn't exactly a consulting business. A chill ran through me. What was it? It presented itself as a retirement planning service? I frowned. Presented itself? That's the problem. My grip tightened around the phone. Michael continued carefully. The company targeted older adults. The room suddenly felt colder. Targeted how? Financial seminars. Pause. Investment guidance. Another pause. Retirement opportunities. I didn't like where this was going. Not at all. And Michael sighed. The promises weren't real. My heart sank. For several moments, I couldn't speak. Then I quietly asked, "How many people?" "I don't know." The answer wasn't reassuring. If Michael didn't know, the number could be much larger than anyone expected. What happened to the company? It dissolved. That wasn't surprising. Companies disappear all the time. But Michael wasn't finished. It dissolved shortly after multiple complaints were filed. I felt sick. What kind of complaints? Misrepresentation. Pause. Questionable investment practices. Pause. Financial losses. The silence that followed felt heavy. Very heavy. Because suddenly Linda Parker's warning made perfect sense. She hadn't been exaggerating. She hadn't been bitter. She had been trying to warn me. What was Brittany's role? I finally asked. Another pause. Then Michael answered. Officially, yes, co-founder. The word hit me like a punch. Co-founder. Not receptionist, not assistant, not employee, co-founder, a major participant. I sat motionless, trying to process it. For months I had wondered whether Brittany had made a few bad decisions. Now it appeared her involvement had been much deeper, much more deliberate. What happened after the company closed? Michael flipped through more documents. Several civil actions followed. I swallowed hard. Against Brittany, against the company. That distinction mattered. And it didn't, because people often hide behind companies when things go wrong. What happened to the lawsuits? Most ended without significant recovery. I immediately understood what he meant. The money was gone. The victims never got it back. The realization made me angry. Not because of the money. Because many of those victims were likely older people. People who had spent decades saving for retirement. People who trusted the wrong person. People like Richard and me. People like Linda. My voice hardened. And then Brittany changed her name? Michael hesitated. Not immediately, but eventually. Yes. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then he said something that made my stomach twist. There may have been another partner. I sat up straighter. What do you mean? The records reference a man. My mind immediately returned to Ava's comments. The strange visitors, the arguments, the debt collectors. Everything suddenly felt connected. Who was he? I don't know yet. That answer frustrated me. But at least it was honest. What else do you know? Michael sighed. Not enough. Then his tone changed. More serious, more concerned. However, I know enough to tell you this. I waited. If Brittany is facing pressure from old financial obligations, Ethan may already be exposed. My heart dropped. How exposed? I don't know. There was that phrase again. I don't know. The most terrifying words in any investigation, because uncertainty leaves room for disaster. After we ended the call, I sat in silence. The pieces were finally forming a picture. Not a complete picture, but enough. Brittany had a hidden past, a failed company, financial complaints, victims, a changed identity, and now suspicious activity connected to Ethan's property. The question was no longer whether Brittany had secrets. The question was whether she was repeating old behavior. That answer arrived sooner than I expected. 2 days later, I attended one of Ava's school concerts. The auditorium was packed. Parents filled every row. Children moved nervously backstage. As I searched for my seat, I spotted Brittany sitting alone. Ethan had been delayed at work. I reluctantly sat beside her. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Brittany surprised me. You've been asking questions. My entire body stiffened. The statement wasn't a question. It was an accusation. I turned slowly. What do you mean? She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You're smarter than people think. I forced myself to remain calm. I don't know what you're talking about. Her eyes narrowed slightly. For a moment, I thought she might continue. Instead, she laughed softly. Forget it. But I couldn't, not after that, because for the first time, Brittany had indirectly acknowledged something. She knew I was paying attention, and she didn't like it. The concert began. Children sang. Parents applauded. Yet throughout the entire performance, I felt Brittany watching me, studying me, measuring me. The sensation was deeply unsettling. Afterward, she left immediately, without speaking again. That encounter stayed with me. Because guilty people often react in specific ways. Some become defensive. Some become angry. Some become frightened. Brittany seemed calculated, which worried me far more. The next breakthrough came unexpectedly. From Michael, again. 3 days later, he called with new information. Sherry, I identified one of the visitors. My pulse quickened. What visitor? The man with the beard Ava described? I nearly dropped the phone. How? A neighbor's security footage. For a moment, I was speechless. What did you find? Michael answered immediately. The man works for a debt recovery company. Everything inside me went cold. Every suspicion, every theory, every fear, confirmed. Not proven completely, but confirmed enough. The visitors weren't friends. They weren't business associates. They weren't relatives. They were connected to debt. Serious debt. The kind that follows people. The kind that knocks on doors. The kind that refuses to disappear. I sank into a chair. Does Ethan know? I doubt it. The answer hurt, because my son had always trusted people, especially those he loved, and trust can become dangerous when placed in the wrong hands. That night, I couldn't sleep. Again, I sat in my living room staring at Richard's photograph, thinking, remembering, praying I was wrong, praying there was still some explanation that made sense. But deep down, I already knew. The evidence pointed in only one direction. Brittany's past wasn't buried. It was alive. And somehow, it had found its way into Ethan's life. The most frightening realization of all came shortly before dawn. I suddenly understood why Brittany seemed so desperate. Why she was constantly checking her phone. Why she panicked during calls. Why creditors kept appearing. Why financial documents were moving around. She wasn't dealing with an old problem. She was dealing with a current one. Something active, something urgent, something dangerous, and for the first time, I began to fear that my son wasn't merely living beside the problem. He might already be the solution Brittany intended to use. Because if she needed money desperately enough, if she had exhausted every other option, then Ethan's assets might be the next target. And I was becoming increasingly certain that the paperwork Michael discovered wasn't an accident. It was the beginning of a plan. A plan that could destroy everything Ethan had worked for? There are few things more painful than watching someone you love walk directly toward danger while refusing to believe your warnings. That was exactly what happened with Ethan. For weeks, I had gathered information, documents, records, conversations, observations. Every new discovery strengthened my fears. Yet I still hadn't spoken openly to my son. Part of me wanted to protect him from the truth. Another part feared what would happen if I waited too long. Eventually, I realized I had no choice. I had to try, even if he hated me for it. The opportunity came on a quiet Wednesday evening. Ethan called unexpectedly. His voice sounded exhausted. "Long day?" I asked. "You have no idea." I could hear the stress immediately. The strain, the fatigue, the pressure, the sound of a man carrying too much weight. We talked casually for several minutes. Work, weather, Ava's school activities, normal topics. Then I took a deep breath. "Ethan, yeah, I need to ask you something important." The silence on the other end instantly changed. "What is it?" I chose my words carefully. Very carefully. "Has Brittany ever talked to you about a company she used to own?" A long pause followed. "Too long. Finally," Ethan answered. "What company? The consulting business?" More silence. Then, "No." The answer confirmed something immediately. Brittany had never told him. Not everything, at least. I pressed forward. "Did she ever mention legal disputes?" His tone hardened. "Mom!" My stomach tightened. I knew that tone. The warning tone. The one people use when they already dislike where a conversation is heading. I'm only asking, why? I hesitated. Then I decided to tell part of the truth. Because I've learned some things. Another pause. What things? This was the moment. The point where everything could still go in either direction. I could back away, or I could continue. I continued. A woman approached me several weeks ago. Silence. She knew Brittany before she married you. Still silence. Then Ethan sighed. A long, frustrated sigh. Mom! The way he said it hurt. Not because of the word, because of what it meant. He already believed I was being unreasonable. I think you should listen. I'm listening. No, he wasn't. Not really. I knew my son, and right now, he was simply waiting for me to finish so he could explain why I was wrong. I continued anyway. I told him about Linda Parker. The old company, the changed name, the financial complaints. Not every detail, just enough to raise concern. Or at least that was my hope. When I finished speaking, Ethan remained silent. For several seconds, I felt hopeful. Maybe he was thinking. Maybe he was processing. Maybe he was finally seeing what I saw. Then he spoke. And my hope disappeared. Did Brittany tell you any of this? No. So, you're basing all of this on strangers and internet searches? His words felt like a slap. I'm basing it on evidence. What evidence? The records Michael found? The attorney? Yes. Another sigh. This one louder. More irritated. Mom, do you hear yourself? The question stunned me. Excuse me. You've never liked Brittany. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. That's not true. It is. His voice grew firmer. You've had issues with her for years. Issues. The word stung, as though concern for my family were some personal grudge. I've tried very hard to support your marriage. Then support it. The sentence landed harder than he realized. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Not because I was angry, because I was hurt. Deeply hurt. After everything, after every sacrifice. After every effort to stay silent, this was how he saw me. As an obstacle. As a problem, not as a mother trying to protect him. Have you even asked Brittany about any of this? I finally said. No. Why not? Because I trust my wife. The answer came instantly. Without hesitation, without doubt. And there it was, the wall I couldn't get through. Trust. Blind trust. The kind that makes intelligent people ignore obvious warning signs. I trusted your father, I said softly. That's different. Why? Because Dad earned it. The silence that followed felt endless. Because without meaning to, Ethan had revealed the truth. Trust should be earned. And yet he had never asked whether Brittany had earned it. He had simply given it. Completely. Unconditionally. No questions asked. The conversation deteriorated quickly after that. The more I tried to explain, the more defensive he became. The more defensive he became. The more frustrated I grew. Finally, Ethan said something that broke my heart. You're looking for reasons to hate her. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Because I suddenly realized Brittany had been working on him for years. Little comments, little suggestions, little stories. Tiny seeds planted slowly over time. And now those seeds had grown. Now he genuinely believed I was the problem, not the suspicious financial activity, not the debt collectors, not the hidden history, me. The call ended badly, very badly. Afterward, I sat alone in my kitchen for nearly an hour, staring at nothing, trying not to cry. But eventually the tears came anyway. Not because Ethan disagreed with me, because he hadn't even considered the possibility that I might be right. That realization hurt more than any argument. The following Sunday, things became worse. I attended another family dinner. The atmosphere felt strange from the moment I arrived. Brittany seemed unusually confident, almost triumphant, as though she already knew about my conversation with Ethan. And based on her behavior, I suspected she did. Halfway through dinner, she smiled and asked, "So, Sherry, have you been keeping busy lately?" The question sounded harmless. But the look in her eyes wasn't. I recognized it immediately. She was baiting me, testing me, trying to determine how much I knew. I smiled politely. "I've been organizing old paperwork." Something flickered across her face. Only for a moment. Then it disappeared. "That sounds exciting. More interesting than you'd think." For several seconds, neither of us looked away. Then Ethan changed the subject. The moment passed, but the message remained. Brittany knew, or at least she suspected, the game had changed. 3 days later, Michael called again. His voice sounded more serious than ever. "Sherry, what happened?" "We found additional documents." My pulse quickened. "What kind?" "The financing paperwork." I stood immediately. "Tell me." Michael hesitated. Then he spoke carefully. "The application wasn't completed." I exhaled slightly. That was good news. At least partially. But I knew there was a but. There was always a but. Michael sighed. "But Ethan signed something else." My stomach dropped. "What?" "We're still trying to determine exactly what." The room suddenly felt smaller. "What do you mean exactly?" The documents appear connected to a larger financial package." My heart pounded. "How serious is this?" Several seconds passed. Then Michael answered. "Potentially very serious." I gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady myself. Because deep down, I already knew what was happening. Brittany wasn't merely hiding her past anymore. She was actively creating a future problem, a very expensive one, and somehow, Ethan had become involved. Maybe unknowingly, maybe through trust, maybe through manipulation, but involved nonetheless. As the call ended, one thought kept repeating inside my head. I had failed. I had tried to warn him, and he hadn't listened. Now the consequences were getting closer, faster, more dangerous. The worst part was knowing what came next. Eventually, the truth would become impossible to ignore. And when that happened, Ethan would have to choose: believe his wife, or believe the evidence. Unfortunately, before that choice arrived, Brittany was about to make a move that would place my son's entire financial future at risk. After my conversation with Michael, I stopped hoping the truth would reveal itself gently. That wasn't going to happen. Whatever Brittany was hiding had become too large, too complicated, too dangerous. The only remaining question was whether the truth would come out before my son's life was damaged beyond repair. A few days later, I received an invitation that immediately made me uneasy. It was for Ethan's birthday dinner. Brittany was hosting it. The message arrived in a group text. Family, friends, co-workers, neighbors. Nearly 20 people had been invited. At first glance, it looked like a simple celebration. But something about it felt wrong. Very wrong. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe it was because I had spent months watching Brittany build a perfect image that didn't match reality. Whatever the reason, I couldn't shake the feeling. 3 days before the party, Ethan called me. You coming Saturday? Of course. Ava's excited. That alone would have guaranteed my attendance, no matter how uncomfortable things had become. After we hung up, I sat quietly at my kitchen table. The folder rested beside me. The same folder that had grown steadily thicker over the past several months. Inside were copies of business records, financial documents, public filings, notes from conversations, information from Michael, and every piece pointed toward the same conclusion. Brittany had lied, repeatedly. The only thing missing was the moment when everyone else finally saw it. Over the following days, I added more material to the folder, not because I planned to use it. At least, that was what I told myself. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was preparing, just in case. By Friday evening, the folder had become an envelope. A large, brown envelope. Simple. Ordinary. Yet heavy enough to change lives. I placed it inside my purse, then tried not to think about it. Saturday arrived. The day of the party, the entire morning felt strange. I found myself unable to focus, unable to relax, unable to stop imagining possible outcomes. Maybe nothing would happen. Maybe the dinner would be completely normal. Maybe I would return home wondering why I had worried so much. But another part of me knew better. The situation had been building for too long. Something was coming. I could feel it. Around 6 o'clock, I drove to Ethan's house. Cars already lined both sides of the street. The driveway was full. Laughter drifted from the backyard. The scene looked cheerful. Perfect. Exactly the image Brittany loved projecting. I took a deep breath, then walked inside. Immediately, I saw decorations everywhere. Balloons, photographs, birthday banners, tables covered with food, guests chatting and smiling. At the center of it all stood Brittany, the perfect hostess, the perfect wife, the perfect mother, at least on the surface. She spotted me almost immediately. Sherry. The smile appeared. The same rehearsed smile I'd seen 100 times. Glad you made it. Wouldn't miss Ethan's birthday. For a moment, we simply looked at each other. Neither of us entirely trusting the other. Then she turned away to greet another guest. The interaction lasted less than 10 seconds. Yet it told me everything. She was nervous. I could see it. The confidence remained. But underneath it was tension, the kind that comes from carrying secrets. Inside the house, I found Ava. She ran straight into my arms. "Grandma." "There she is." She hugged me tightly. The simple affection nearly brought tears to my eyes. Because Ava had no agenda, no manipulation, no lies, just love, the way families should be. For the next hour, guests continued arriving, more friends, more relatives, several of Ethan's co-workers, even a few neighbors. By 7:30, nearly every chair was occupied, and that's when I noticed something strange. My place at the table, at first, I assumed it was a mistake. Then I realized it wasn't. Everyone important sat close to Ethan, his closest friends, his co-workers, Brittany, Ava, even distant acquaintances. Meanwhile, my chair had been placed near the far end, almost separated from the main group. Not completely isolated, just enough to send a message. You don't belong in the center. I smiled anyway, because after months of dealing with Brittany, I recognized the tactic. Small humiliations, small exclusions, small reminders of status, always subtle, always deniable. Never accidental. As dinner began, the pattern continued. Whenever someone complimented the house, Brittany accepted the praise. Whenever someone mentioned family sacrifices, Brittany conveniently omitted certain details. Whenever conversations touched on success, she positioned herself as a key reason for Ethan's achievements. I watched quietly, listening, observing, gathering. Then came the comments about age. At first, they sounded harmless. A joke about technology, a joke about social media, a joke about younger generations teaching older generations. The guests laughed. I smiled politely. Then Brittany looked directly at me. "You know how it is." Her voice carried across the table. "Sometimes older people just struggle to keep up." Several guests chuckled awkwardly. I remained silent. She continued, "But that's okay. We love them anyway." More laughter. My smile never moved. Neither did hers. To everyone else, it sounded playful. To me, it felt deliberate. Another test. Another attempt to see whether I would react. I didn't. The evening continued, yet the tension kept growing, especially after Ethan stood and thanked everyone for attending. His speech was heartfelt, genuine. Typical Ethan. He thanked his friends, his co-workers, his daughter, and finally, Brittany. As he spoke, she looked almost emotional. Almost. Because I noticed something else. Several times during the speech, she checked her phone beneath the table. Not openly, secretly. Quick glances, quick reactions. The behavior looked familiar. Too familiar. And each time she looked, her expression darkened slightly, as though she were waiting for something. Or worried about something. When the speech ended, everyone applauded. The mood felt celebratory, warm, happy. Yet beneath that surface, I sensed pressure building, like a storm hidden behind clear skies. Then Ethan made an announcement, one that immediately caught my attention. Brittany and I have some exciting plans coming up. My stomach tightened. Across the table, Brittany smiled. The smile seemed forced. Prepared. Anticipating, Ethan continued. We're exploring some financial opportunities. My heart nearly stopped. Financial opportunities. The phrase echoed inside my mind. Every warning bell began ringing at once. I glanced toward Brittany. Her eyes briefly met mine. And for the first time all evening, I saw something unmistakable. Fear. Real fear. Not anxiety. Not stress. Fear. The kind people experience when they worry a secret is about to be exposed. At that moment, I knew with complete certainty that something significant was about to happen. The envelope inside my purse suddenly felt much heavier, much more important. And as I looked around the crowded table, one realization became impossible to ignore. This dinner wasn't going to end peacefully. One way or another, the truth was approaching. And very soon, someone would be forced to choose between protecting a lie and revealing it. I have replayed that dinner in my mind hundreds of times. Every word, every expression, every moment of silence. Because that was the night everything changed. The night Brittany finally pushed too far. And the night I stopped staying quiet. The conversation continued after Ethan mentioned the financial opportunities. Most of the guests seemed excited. A few asked questions. Others congratulated him. No one knew what I knew. No one knew about the debt collectors, the forged signatures, the hidden past, the complaints, the lawsuits, the fear. To everyone else, Ethan and Brittany looked like a successful couple planning their future. I almost envied their ignorance. Almost. Across the table, Brittany launched into a polished explanation. We've been looking at ways to expand our investments. She smiled confidently. The timing finally feels right. Several guests nodded approvingly. One of Ethan's coworkers raised a glass. Good for you guys. Everyone seemed impressed. Everyone except me, because I noticed something important. Ethan wasn't leading the conversation. Brittany was. Every answer came from her. Every detail came from her. Every explanation came from her. Ethan mostly sat there smiling, trusting, believing, exactly as he always had. And that frightened me. As the meal continued, I struggled with myself. Part of me wanted to leave, to avoid the confrontation entirely, to let the evening pass, to preserve what remained of my relationship with Ethan. But another part of me remembered Ava, the little girl who had asked whether adults always told the truth. The little girl who listened to arguments through her bedroom door. The little girl whose future might be affected by every decision made at that table. I couldn't leave. Not anymore. About 30 minutes later, dessert was served. The mood relaxed. Conversations became louder. People laughed. Someone started sharing old stories about Ethan. For a brief moment, everything almost felt normal. Then Brittany made her mistake. It happened during a discussion about family advice. One of the guests, an older neighbor named Carol, mentioned how much she still valued wisdom from her parents. I call my mother every week, Carol said. She's 84 and still gives great advice. Several people smiled. Then Brittany laughed. Not kindly, mockingly. That's sweet. Something about her tone made the table go quiet. She lifted her wine glass. Then she said the words that changed everything. Honestly, I think a lot of older people just don't know when to stop interfering. A few guests exchanged uncomfortable looks. Brittany continued. They think experience means they're always right. No one responded. The silence grew heavier. Then she looked directly at me. Not accidentally. Intentionally. And she smiled. The same smile she'd used for years. The smile that always carried a hidden insult. Then she said it. Sometimes old people should just stay quiet. The room froze. Every conversation stopped. Every fork paused. Every eye turned toward me. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I looked at Ethan, my son, the boy I had raised, the man I had sacrificed so much for. Surely he would say something. Surely he would defend me. He didn't. He simply sat there, uncomfortable, embarrassed, silent. That silence hurt more than Brittany's words ever could. For several seconds, I felt every emotion imaginable. Humiliation, anger, disappointment, heartbreak, but most of all, clarity. Because in that moment, I finally understood something. Staying silent wasn't protecting my family anymore. It was protecting a lie. Slowly, I placed my napkin on the table. The movement drew everyone's attention. I stood. No one spoke. The room had become so quiet, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. Brittany watched me carefully. Her smile remained. But I noticed something else. Confidence. She thought she had won. She thought I would leave. She thought I would cry. She thought I would stay quiet. Instead, I reached into my purse and removed the large brown envelope. The moment Brittany saw it, something changed. The confidence disappeared. Just slightly, but enough. I placed the envelope on the table, directly in front of me. The sound seemed unusually loud. Several guests stared at it, confused. Ethan frowned. Mom. I looked at him. Then I looked at Brittany. For years, I had called her Brittany Chapman. The name everyone knew. The name she wanted everyone to know. Not tonight. Tonight, I used a different name. Brittany Collins. The reaction was immediate. Color drained from her face. Not a little. Completely. It was as though someone had flipped a switch. Across the table, several guests looked confused. Ethan blinked. What did you say? I never took my eyes off Brittany. Brittany Collins. For a moment, I thought she might deny it. Instead, she stared at me, frozen, silent, terrified. And that told everyone at the table more than words ever could. Ethan looked between us. What's going on? Nobody answered. Not yet. The tension became unbearable. Finally, Brittany found her voice. Sherry, this isn't appropriate. I almost laughed. Appropriate. After everything she had done. After everything she had hidden. Now she wanted to discuss appropriateness. I remained calm, remarkably calm, because I had spent months preparing for this moment. I agree. My voice stayed steady. This conversation should have happened a long time ago. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. One of them quietly set down a fork. Nobody wanted to interrupt. Nobody understood what was happening. But everyone knew something significant was unfolding. Ethan stood. "Mom, what are you talking about?" I looked at my son. For a brief moment, my heart broke all over again, because I knew what came next would hurt him. There was no avoiding that. But lies were already hurting him. The truth simply had sharper edges. Brittany never told you about her previous business, did she? Confusion crossed his face. What business, exactly? What business? The same question he should have been asking months ago. Across the table, Brittany stood abruptly. "We're not doing this." Her voice shook. Not with anger. With fear. Pure fear. She reached toward the envelope, instinctively, as though she wanted to grab it before anyone saw what was inside. I moved it away. A small motion, but enough. The room grew even quieter. Several guests now looked openly alarmed. One woman whispered something to her husband. Nobody left. Nobody looked away, because everyone sensed they were witnessing something important, something real. Brittany's composure began cracking. The perfect hostess. The perfect wife. Oh. The perfect image she had carefully maintained for years. Tiny fractures appeared, then larger ones. Her breathing quickened. Her hands trembled. And for the first time all evening, she looked exactly like the woman I'd seen after those mysterious phone calls. Desperate, cornered, afraid. Ethan noticed it too. I could see the confusion spreading across his face. Because this wasn't the Brittany he knew, or thought he knew. Britt, she didn't answer. That silence spoke volumes. Then I placed one hand on the envelope and said the words that changed everything. The truth is in here. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even Ava had become silent, watching, waiting. The entire room seemed suspended in time, because everyone understood what was coming next. The secrets, the documents, the evidence, the lies. Months of deception hidden inside a simple brown envelope. And as Brittany stared at it with visible panic, I knew something with absolute certainty. She wasn't afraid of what I might say. She was afraid of what I could prove. The silence that followed felt endless. 20 people sat around that dining table. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Everyone stared at the envelope. And everyone stared at Brittany. Especially Brittany. Because for the first time since I had known her, she looked completely unprepared. Not annoyed. Not defensive. Terrified. Ethan looked between us. His confusion was obvious. "Mom," he said carefully. "What is going on?" I took a slow breath. This was the moment I had spent months trying to avoid. Not because I doubted the truth. Because I knew what the truth would do. It would destroy a marriage. It would break trust. It would hurt my son. But sometimes The truth hurts because it removes the illusion people have been living inside. I placed my hand on the envelope. Then I looked directly at Ethan. You deserve to know who your wife really is. Brittany immediately stepped forward. That's enough, her voice cracked. The crack was small, but everyone heard it. I remained calm. No, it isn't enough. You're embarrassing yourself. I almost smiled, because that had always been her strategy. Dismiss, deflect, attack, never answer, never explain, never acknowledge. Tonight it wasn't going to work. Slowly, I opened the envelope. The sound of paper sliding across the table seemed unusually loud. I removed the first document. Then I looked at Ethan. Did Brittany ever tell you she used to own a company under the name Brittany Collins? His eyes moved immediately toward his wife. She didn't answer. That answer alone was enough. No, Ethan said quietly. I nodded. I didn't think so. I slid the document across the table. Ethan picked it up. Several guests leaned forward. The room remained silent. As he read, confusion appeared on his face. Then concern. Then disbelief. What is this? A business registration? I kept my voice steady. One Brittany never mentioned. Across the table, Brittany folded her arms. It's ancient history. The reaction interested me, not because she denied it, because she didn't. She had just confirmed the document was real. Several people noticed. I could see it in their faces. Ethan noticed too. His eyes narrowed slightly. Why wouldn't you tell me about this? Brittany immediately answered. Because it wasn't important. I almost laughed. Not important. The phrase sounded ridiculous now. I reached into the envelope again. The second document emerged. Then the third. Then the fourth. Each one landed on the table, one after another, like pieces of a puzzle. A very ugly puzzle. Ethan stared at them. What am I looking at? Civil complaints? His face went pale. What? People who lost money. The room seemed to shrink. A guest quietly whispered, Oh my God. Brittany spun toward me. Those were never proven. I met her gaze. No, but they existed. She didn't respond, because she couldn't. The documents were real. Everyone could see them. I continued. Several individuals claimed they were misled by the company. Claims. Brittany practically spat the word. Claims. I nodded. Then explain why you never told Ethan. Silence. Again. That silence was becoming very expensive. Ethan looked at her. Brittany. Nothing. His voice became firmer. Brittany. Finally she spoke. It happened years ago. Not a denial. Another admission. A very important one. The tension inside the room became unbearable. Then I pulled out another document. This one changed everything. A legal name record. Official. Simple. Undeniable. I placed it in front of Ethan. What is this? He asked. I answered softly. The record showing Brittany Collins became Brittany Chapman. His eyes scanned the page. Then he looked up. You changed your name. Brittany laughed nervously. Women change names when they get married. I nodded. Yes. Then I leaned forward slightly. But most women tell their husbands what their previous name was. The room went completely silent. Every guest understood exactly what I meant. Ethan slowly turned toward his wife. Is that true? For the first time all evening, Brittany couldn't look him in the eye. That moment mattered. More than any document, more than any accusation, because trust lives in eye contact, and hers had disappeared. I watched realization begin spreading across Ethan's face. Not acceptance, not yet, but doubt. For the first time, doubt. Then I removed another set of papers. These weren't public records. These came through Michael's investigation. And these were the documents Brittany feared most. My hand rested on them for a moment. The room felt frozen. Then I slid them toward Ethan. What now? He asked quietly. I swallowed. The financing paperwork. Brittany moved instantly. No. Everyone jumped slightly. The reaction was explosive, immediate, desperate. Exactly the reaction of someone who already knew what was inside. Ethan stared at her. Why are you saying no? She didn't answer. Instead, she looked at me. The hatred in her eyes shocked me. Months earlier, that expression might have frightened me. Not anymore. I had come too far. You had no right. The words came out through clenched teeth. I answered calmly. I had every right to protect my son. Ethan grabbed the documents. Then he started reading. The transformation happened slowly. At first, confusion, then concentration, then concern, then fear, real fear. His eyes moved across the pages repeatedly. He looked back. Then read again, then back again. Finally, he whispered, "What is this?" I looked at him. A loan application package connected to your property. His face went white. I never approved this. Nobody spoke. The room became completely still. Then Ethan pointed to the signature. But that's my signature. I nodded. That's what Michael Reynolds noticed. Across the table, Brittany suddenly stood. I want a lawyer. The sentence hit the room like a bomb. Several guests gasped. Because innocent people rarely ask for lawyers during birthday dinners, the realization spread quickly, visible, unavoidable. Ethan looked at her, slowly, carefully, as though seeing her for the first time. Why would you need a lawyer? She didn't answer, not immediately, and that silence was devastating. Then another voice spoke. A female voice from the far end of the table. I think I know why. Everyone turned. A woman in her mid-30s slowly stood. I recognized her instantly. Sarah Parker, Linda Parker's daughter. Michael had invited her quietly several days earlier after verifying her connection to the old case. I hadn't expected her to speak. Yet here she was, calm, composed, and carrying her own folder. Brittany's face drained of color completely. Sarah looked directly at her. My mother lost $38,000. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. My parents trusted your company. The words landed with incredible force. Brittany closed her eyes briefly, as though she already knew this moment would eventually arrive. Sarah continued. They spent years trying to recover their savings. The room remained silent. My father died before it happened. Several guests lowered their eyes. One woman covered her mouth. Sarah wasn't shouting. She didn't need to. The truth was doing the work for her. Then she placed her own documents on the table. More records. More names. More evidence. And suddenly the story stopped being about accusations. It became about patterns. Victims. Money. Secrets. And lies. The perfect image Brittany had spent years creating began collapsing in front of everyone, piece by piece. Document by document. Truth by truth. I looked at Ethan. The pain in his face nearly broke my heart. Because this was the moment everything changed. Not when I spoke. Not when the envelope appeared. Not when the records emerged. This moment. The moment he finally realized that too many people knew the same story. Too many documents said the same thing. Too many pieces fit together. And deep down, he knew what everyone else in that room was beginning to understand. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't ancient history. This was a lie that had survived for years, and it had finally run out of places to hide. The collapse of a lie is rarely dramatic at first. People imagine shouting, screaming, objects being thrown across rooms. Sometimes it happens that way. But more often, the collapse begins with silence. The kind of silence that settles over people when they realize their entire understanding of someone may have been wrong. That was the silence that filled Ethan's dining room. No one knew what to say. No one knew what to do. The birthday party was over. Not officially, but emotionally, completely. Ethan remained standing beside the table. The documents spread out before him. His eyes moved from page to page. Again. And again. As if reading them enough times might somehow change what they said. Across the room, Brittany stood motionless. Her perfect image had shattered. Not because of one accusation. Because of the mountain of evidence surrounding it. The business records. The complaints. The hidden identity. The financing documents. Sarah Parker's testimony. All of it pointed in the same direction. And for the first time in years, Brittany had nowhere to hide. Finally, Ethan looked up. His voice was barely above a whisper. Tell me this isn't true. He wasn't looking at me. He wasn't looking at Sarah. He was looking directly at his wife. Brittany swallowed. For several seconds she said nothing. Then she tried the only strategy she had left. She cried. Tears appeared instantly, almost impressively fast. Years earlier, that might have worked. Not tonight. Ethan, she whispered, you don't understand. The sentence felt familiar. Because people rarely begin with the truth when they're cornered. They begin with confusion. Then excuses. Then blame. And Brittany followed the pattern perfectly. You don't understand what happened. Ethan stared at her. Then explain it. She looked around the room, searching, calculating, trying to identify an escape route. There wasn't one. Finally, she spoke. The company failed. Nobody interrupted. The economy crashed. Still, nobody interrupted. We made mistakes. The wording immediately caught my attention. We made mistakes. Not I made mistakes. We, as though responsibility became smaller when shared. Sarah Parker crossed her arms. My parents lost almost $40,000? Brittany didn't look at her. I never stole anything. The response came too quickly. Too defensively. Sarah shook her head. I didn't say you stole it. The room became even quieter, because Brittany had just defended herself against an accusation nobody made. A mistake, a revealing mistake, Ethan noticed. I could see it. The same way I could see doubt spreading through him. Growing, expanding, replacing trust. Then he picked up the financing documents again. His hands were shaking. What about this? Brittany's expression changed immediately. Fear, raw fear, real fear. This isn't what it looks like, huh? The oldest excuse in history. Ethan laughed. Not because anything was funny, because he was beginning to break. Then what does it look like? She opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. No answer came. And that answer was answer enough. Then Ethan asked the question that truly mattered. Did you sign my name? Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. For several seconds, Brittany simply stared at him. Then she whispered, I was trying to help us. The room exploded. Not literally. Emotionally. Gasps. Whispers. Shock, because that wasn't a denial, not even close. It was an admission disguised as justification. I closed my eyes briefly. Part of me felt relief. After months of doubt, the truth was finally emerging. Another part felt heartbreak, because I could hear Ethan's heart breaking from across the room. What did you do? He asked. His voice sounded different now. Smaller. Damaged. Brittany began talking quickly. Too quickly. As though speed might somehow make the story sound reasonable. We had debt. Ethan blinked. What debt? More silence. Then, my debt. The room went still again. My debt. Not our debt. Not family debt. Her debt. The distinction mattered. Very much. Ethan's face lost what little color remained. What debt? Again, she hesitated. Then she said a number. The reaction was immediate. Several guests gasped. One man cursed under his breath. Even I felt dizzy. The amount was far larger than anyone expected. Years of accumulated obligations. Old settlements. Legal expenses. Private loans. Interest. Collection actions. The past Brittany thought she had escaped had been chasing her for years. And now it had finally caught up. Ethan looked physically ill. You never told me. No. Why? The answer came quietly. Because I knew you'd leave. Nobody spoke. Because everyone understood what that meant. She had hidden the truth intentionally, not out of fear, out of strategy. The difference mattered. Then another devastating realization struck Ethan. I saw it happen, right in front of us. His eyes suddenly widened. Ava, Brittany froze. My stomach dropped, because I immediately understood where his mind had gone. Ethan looked at her. What about Ava's account? No answer. The silence lasted only 2 seconds. but it felt like 2 years. What about Ava's account? His voice rose. Again. No answer. That was enough. Ethan snatched his phone from the table. His hands shook violently as he opened financial apps. Statements, accounts, records. The room watched. Nobody dared interrupt. Then he found something. His face went completely white. No, he scrolled. No. Again and again. Then he looked up. The pain in his eyes nearly destroyed me. You touched Ava's education fund. Brittany immediately shook her head. No. But Ethan was already reading. Transaction records. Transfer attempts. Authorization requests. Incomplete but visible. Evidence. The truth sitting right there on his screen. His daughter. His little girl, the child she claimed to love. Even that money had become part of her plan. The room erupted. Several guests stood. Others began gathering belongings. The party had become something else entirely. A public collapse. A public exposure. A public reckoning. Ava, meanwhile, looked terrified. Tears filled her eyes. She didn't understand finances. She didn't understand debt. She only understood that her parents were hurting each other. That realization broke my heart. I immediately moved beside her, wrapped an arm around her shoulders. It's okay. It wasn't okay. Not really. But children deserve comfort before explanations. Across the room, Ethan looked at Brittany as though he had never seen her before. Maybe he hadn't. Not the real version. Not the complete version. Not until tonight. Then he said something I'll never forget. You used me. The words were quiet, but devastating. Brittany started crying again. Real tears this time. Not performance. Not manipulation. Reality. Because she finally understood something. The game was over. The lies were over. The excuses were over. The truth had won, and truth is merciless once it arrives. Then Ethan reached for his phone again. "Oh, who are you calling?" Brittany asked. His answer came immediately. "A lawyer." The room fell silent. Because everyone understood what that meant. This wasn't a temporary argument. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't something that would disappear by morning. This was the beginning of consequences. Real consequences. Legal consequences. Financial consequences. Life-changing consequences. Brittany sank into a chair, defeated. For the first time since I had known her, she looked small. Not powerful, not controlling, not confident, just small and alone. As guests slowly began leaving, the family Brittany had spent years controlling collapsed around her. The marriage, the trust, the image, everything. And standing in the middle of that destruction was my son. Heartbroken, humiliated, devastated. Yet for the first time in months, he was finally seeing clearly. The truth had cost him dearly. But blindness would have cost him far more. 3 weeks passed before Ethan came to see me. 3 long weeks. 3 painful weeks. 3 weeks filled with lawyers, financial reviews, unanswered questions. and consequences that seemed to grow larger every day. During that time, we spoke only briefly, mostly about Ava. Never about Brittany. Never about the dinner. Never about the night everything collapsed. I understood why. Some wounds need time before they can be touched. And Ethan was carrying wounds I couldn't fully imagine. The betrayal of a spouse is painful. The betrayal of a spouse you trusted completely is devastating. The betrayal of a spouse you defended against your own mother is something else entirely. One rainy Thursday evening, I was sitting in my living room reading when I heard a knock at the door. The weather had been miserable all day. Heavy clouds, cold wind, steady rain. I glanced at the clock. Almost 8 o'clock. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, I found Ethan standing on my porch. Soaked, exhausted, broken. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said the words I had been waiting months to hear. "I'm sorry, Mom." My heart cracked instantly. Not because I needed an apology, because of the pain behind it. This wasn't the voice of a proud man. This was the voice of a son carrying regret. Deep regret. I stepped aside. "Come in." He entered slowly. Water dripped from his jacket. His shoulders sagged. He looked older than 42. Much older. The weight of recent weeks had changed him. I made coffee. He sat quietly at the kitchen table. The same table where Richard and I had spent decades discussing life. Raising a family, planning a future. Now Ethan sat there staring into space, trying to rebuild his own future. Finally he spoke. I should have listened. The words came softly. I sat across from him. Neither judgment nor anger remained inside me, only sadness. "I know," he nodded. For several moments, silence filled the room. Then he looked up. His eyes were red, not from rain, from crying. "I made you the enemy." The honesty hurt, because it was true. For months, maybe years, Brittany had slowly convinced him that my concerns were interference, that my questions were criticism, that my instincts were jealousy. And eventually he believed it, not because he was foolish, because he was loyal. Unfortunately, loyalty can become dangerous when given to the wrong person. "I never wanted to believe it," he said. "I know. I thought if I trusted her enough, everything would work out." I smiled sadly. "Trust isn't the problem." He looked confused. "What do you mean? Trust should exist." I leaned forward slightly. "But trust should never replace honesty." The words hung in the air between us. Then Ethan lowered his eyes. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he whispered, "I let you stand alone." That statement hurt more than anything else. Not because I wanted support, because it was true. At that dinner, at dozens of dinners before it, at countless moments over the years. He had watched Brittany dismiss me, mock me, ignore me, and he had stayed silent, not out of cruelty, out of avoidance. Sometimes avoiding conflict creates even greater conflict later. Ethan was finally learning that lesson. I should have said something years ago. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. We all make mistakes. He shook his head. Not like this. The guilt inside him was enormous. I could see it, feel it. Part of me wanted to protect him from it. Another part knew he needed to face it. Healing requires honesty, even painful honesty. Then Ethan surprised me. He started crying, not quietly, not politely. The way grown men cry when they can no longer carry everything alone. The sound broke my heart, because no matter how old he became, he would always be my son. I moved beside him, wrapped my arms around him. And for several minutes, neither of us said anything. We simply sat there, mother and son, trying to put the pieces back together. Eventually, the tears stopped. The conversation continued, this time more openly, more honestly, more deeply than it had in years. Ethan told me everything, the debt, the hidden accounts, the legal notices, the conversations Brittany had concealed, the financial documents he had signed without reading carefully. That last part seemed to haunt him the most. I trusted her. The sentence returned again and again, as though repeating it might somehow change reality. It happens. Not to me. I looked at him carefully. To anyone. That finally got his attention. Because betrayal doesn't happen because people are weak. It happens because people believe. And belief is part of love. The problem wasn't that Ethan loved his wife. The problem was that Brittany used that love as a tool. As the evening continued, we eventually talked about Ava. That conversation mattered most. She's struggling. His voice cracked slightly. I know. Ava had become quieter, more cautious, less carefree. Children absorb conflict like sponges absorb water. They carry wounds adults often fail to notice. I'm trying. I know you are. For the first time that evening, a small smile appeared. Not a happy smile, but a hopeful one. Then Ethan told me something unexpected. He had already begun family counseling for Ava. Therapy, support, structure. The news made me incredibly proud, because healing requires action, not just good intentions. You'll be okay, I said. I hope so. You will. For a moment, he looked like the little boy who used to run into my arms after difficult days at school. The same boy Richard taught to ride a bicycle. The same boy I would have done anything to protect. In many ways, he was still that boy. Life had simply added scars. Eventually, Ethan stood to leave. The rain had slowed outside. The storm was passing. Before reaching the door, he stopped, then turned back toward me. Can I ask you something? Anything. Why didn't you give up on me? The question caught me off guard. I smiled softly. Because the answer was so simple. So simple you already know it. He waited. You are my son. His eyes immediately filled again. Not with pain this time. With gratitude. Then I added something Richard often said. Family doesn't mean accepting bad behavior. I paused. It means loving people enough to tell them the truth. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan nodded slowly, as though finally understanding, not just the words, the lesson that had cost him so much to learn. A few minutes later, he drove away. I stood at the window, watching the taillights disappear into the night. And for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. Not because everything was fixed. It wasn't. Not because the consequences were over. They weren't. But because my son and I had finally found our way back to each other. The lies had separated us. The truth had hurt us. Yet somehow, the truth was also beginning to heal us. 6 months later, the house felt different. Not just Ethan's house. My life, our family, everything. The storm that had begun with a single sentence at a dinner table had finally passed. The damage had been real. The pain had been real. But healing was real too. And healing, I learned, is often quieter than destruction. Destruction arrives loudly. Healing arrives one small step at a time. The legal consequences for Brittany continued long after that birthday dinner. Several financial investigations followed. Civil claims resurfaced. Old records were reviewed. Attorneys became involved. Some matters remained unresolved. Others moved forward. I won't pretend I celebrated any of it. Contrary to what Brittany believed, I never wanted revenge. I didn't spend years gathering information because I hated her. I did it because I loved my son, and because I loved my granddaughter. There is a difference. A very important difference. The purpose of truth should never be cruelty. The purpose of truth should be protection. That lesson stayed with me. So, while many people expected me to feel victorious, I mostly felt sad. Sad for the years that had been wasted. Sad for the trust that had been broken. Sad for the family that might have existed if honesty had been chosen sooner. But alongside that sadness was gratitude. Because things could have ended much worse. Much worse. Ethan's financial situation eventually stabilized. The questionable transactions were stopped before catastrophic damage occurred. Several accounts were secured. The property remained protected. Most importantly, Ava's education fund survived. When Ethan told me that, I nearly cried, because throughout the entire ordeal, that little girl's future had worried me more than anything else. Children should inherit opportunities, not consequences. One Saturday morning, several months after the dinner, Ethan and Ava visited my house. The moment they arrived, I noticed something different. Ava was laughing again. Really laughing. The kind of carefree laughter I hadn't heard in a long time. The sound filled my heart. Children are remarkably resilient when surrounded by safety and love. Not untouched, not unchanged, but resilient. As we sat in the backyard eating lunch, Ethan watched Ava play with the neighbor's dog. A small smile appeared on his face. Then he looked at me. "You were right about something." I laughed softly. Only one thing for the first time in months. He laughed too. A real laugh. Not forced. Not painful. Real. Then he became serious again. You kept saying that silence wasn't helping. I nodded. I remember. I understand now. The words meant more than he realized. Because they represented growth. Growth born from pain. Growth earned through experience. The hardest kind. For years, Ethan had avoided conflict. He believed keeping peace meant staying silent. Now he understood that silence sometimes protects the wrong people. Sometimes silence helps problems grow. Sometimes silence allows lies to survive. That lesson had cost him dearly. But he had learned it, and that mattered. As summer approached, our family slowly rebuilt itself. Not perfectly. No family is perfect. But honestly, which is far more valuable. Ava spent more weekends with me. We baked cookies, visited parks, watched movies, talked about school, talked about life, and occasionally, when she had questions about difficult things, we answered them truthfully, age-appropriately, gently, honestly. One afternoon, she asked me something that nearly made me cry. Grandma, yes, sweetheart, why do grown-ups hide things? The question reminded me of the one she asked months earlier. Do grown-ups always tell the truth? I smiled sadly. Sometimes they're scared. She considered that. Scared of what? The consequences. She nodded thoughtfully, then asked, Does hiding things make them go away? I shook my head. No. She thought for another moment, then delivered a piece of wisdom many adults never learn. It usually makes them bigger. I laughed, because she was absolutely right. Sometimes children understand truth better than adults do. As autumn arrived, Ethan invited me to dinner, a family dinner, a simple dinner, nothing fancy, nothing dramatic, just family. When I arrived, the atmosphere felt completely different from the dinner where everything collapsed. No tension, no performance, no manipulation, no walking on eggshells, just honesty. At one point during the evening, Ethan stood and tapped his glass. The room became quiet. Immediately, I felt nervous. Then he looked directly at me. I want to say something. I knew where this was going, and I wished it wasn't happening. Public attention has never been comfortable for me. But Ethan continued anyway. My mother spent months trying to protect me. The room fell silent. I didn't listen. Emotion tightened his voice. I should have. I looked down at my plate, embarrassed, touched, overwhelmed. Then he said something I'll treasure for the rest of my life. Everything I still have today is because someone loved me enough to tell me the truth. The room applauded softly. I didn't know what to say, so I simply smiled. Sometimes gratitude doesn't require a speech. Sometimes it only requires understanding. Later that evening, after dinner ended, I showed Ethan and Ava something I had never revealed before. A folder. A small folder kept in my safe. Inside were documents connected to a trust fund. Ava looked confused. Ethan looked surprised. What is this? I smiled. A gift. Years earlier, after Richard died, I had quietly started setting aside money. Small amounts. Nothing extravagant, just steady contributions over time. A fund for Ava's future, college, opportunities, dreams, possibilities, the things every grandparent hopes to provide. Tears immediately filled Ethan's eyes. Mom! I squeezed his hand. It's for her. Not for me. Not for him. For her. For the next generation. For hope. For a future built on honesty rather than deception. As I watched Ava smile, I realized something important. The story had never really been about Brittany, not entirely. It was about choices. The choice to speak or stay silent. The choice to protect or ignore. The choice to tell the truth even when it's uncomfortable. Most people remember the moment I revealed Brittany's secret. But that wasn't the most important moment. The most important moment came afterward. When our family chose healing instead of bitterness, growth instead of blame, truth instead of appearances. Because in the end, age wasn't my weakness. It was my strength. Experience wasn't something to be mocked. It was something earned. And the woman who told me old people should stay quiet learned a lesson she never expected. Sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one who knows the truth. And when that truth finally speaks, everyone listens. If this experience taught me anything, it's that wisdom and age should never be mistaken for weakness. Many people assume older adults no longer understand the world around them. They believe experience becomes less valuable with time. In reality, experience is often what allows us to recognize danger before others see it. Another lesson is that love and boundaries must exist together. Loving someone does not mean ignoring harmful behavior. Loving someone does not mean staying silent while they are being deceived. Sometimes, the most loving thing we can do is speak a difficult truth, even when we know it may upset the people we care about. I also learned that silence can be both a gift and a mistake. There are moments when silence creates peace, but there are other moments when silence protects lies, allows manipulation to continue, and gives problems time to grow. Knowing the difference requires courage. Most importantly, honesty matters. Secrets rarely disappear on their own. They grow. They spread. They affect innocent people. The sooner truth enters a situation, the more lives it can protect. Families are not perfect. People make mistakes. Trust can be broken. Hearts can be hurt. But healing is possible when people choose accountability, honesty, and forgiveness. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to tell a difficult truth to protect someone you love? What would you have done if you had been in my position? Share your story in the comments, because someone reading it may need that wisdom today. And if this story touched your heart, please consider liking, subscribing, and joining us for more stories about family, resilience, and the strength that comes from choosing truth.